My name is Evelyn Beaumont, and for 47 years, my entire world has been lovingly contained within the four walls of a white clapboard two-story home on a quiet dogwood-lined street in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. This was never just a house to me. It has always been a living, breathing archive of my life, a silent partner in every joy and sorrow. My late husband, Samuel, and I bought it when we were barely more than children ourselves. Our pockets were thin, holding little more than lint and the kind of beautiful, foolish optimism that only youth can truly afford. I can still see him laying the flagstone path to the front door, his knuckles scraped raw, and his handsome face beaded with summer sweat, beaming with a pride so pure it could have lit up the evening sky. He'd whistle off-key, a cheerful, tuneless sound that I would give anything to hear just one more time. I was the one who planted the climbing rose bushes, the new dawn variety, that now embrace the porch trellis. Their thorns have pricked my fingers more times than I can count over the decades. Each tiny wound a reminder of the care and patience it takes to cultivate beauty. Every scuff on the wide plank heart pine floors in the hall tells a story. There's the deep one, by the staircase, from when our son William tried to ride his new 10-speed bicycle indoors during a torrential summer thunderstorm, and the series of faint, arcing grooves by the fireplace, a permanent ghost of the countless hours our daughter, Claire, spent rocking her doll's cradle, humming lullabies to her imaginary baby. The kitchen, despite my best efforts to air it out, is forever perfumed with the faint, sweet scent of cinnamon and baked apples, the lingering spirit of 1,000 school bake sales, holiday feasts, and late-night comfort baking sessions. Samuel passed away 8 years ago, taken by a sudden illness that felt like a thief in the night. In the deafening silence that followed, the house became my most loyal companion. Its gentle creaks and groans at dusk were no longer just the settling of old wood. They became a familiar language, a comforting murmur that assured me I wasn't entirely alone. The way the golden afternoon sun slanted through the living room window, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny diamonds, was a daily, steadfast ritual that anchored my days. My children, William and Claire, are grown now, with demanding careers and bustling families of their own in the city, a brisk hour's drive away. They visit, of course, usually on Sundays for a few fleeting hours. They bring the grandchildren, whose shrieks and laughter fill the quiet halls with a chaotic but welcome energy, a brief, vibrant storm that stirs the settled air. I'd make them tall glasses of sweet tea and watch them from the porch swing Samuel had installed for our 30th anniversary, its gentle rhythm a metronome for my thoughts. In those precious moments, I felt a deep, abiding contentment, a sense that the threads of our family were still tightly woven. I was convinced they saw this house as I did, not as a collection of wood, nails, and depreciating assets, but as the very heart of our family, the sacred ground where all our best and most formative memories were sown. I would often drift off, imagining them, one day long after I was gone, bringing their own grandchildren here and telling them, with reverence in their voices, this is where it all began. I was so naively certain that they felt the same profound love for this place that I did, believing that love was baked into the very plaster of the walls, a permanent and inseparable part of its structure. That beautiful, comforting dream was all I had left of our shared past. The awakening was the cruelest, most disillusioning moment of my long life. It was a crisp afternoon in early October, the kind of perfect autumn day in North Carolina where the air is sharp and clean, and the leaves are a breathtaking riot of gold, amber, and crimson. I'd spent the morning in the garden, my old joints protesting with every weed I pulled, and had decided to reward myself with a nap in my favorite wingback armchair by the living room window. The sun was warm on my face, and I must have drifted off more deeply than I intended, lulled by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The sound of the front door opening didn't fully wake me, but the low, conspiratorial murmur of voices slowly pulled me from the depths of my slumber. It was William and Claire. They must have used their old key, letting themselves in without a knock. I kept my eyes closed, enjoying that last drowsy comfort in the space between sleep and wakefulness, assuming they'd see me resting and wait quietly. A small warm smile touched my lips. It was sweet of them to check in on me unexpectedly. But then their words, stripped of all pretense, began to slice through the comfortable quiet, each one sharp and clear as broken glass. They were standing in the dining room, just out of my line of sight, their voices lowered with the false confidence of people who believe they are speaking in private. "Look at this wallpaper," Claire said, her voice laced with that familiar note of sophisticated disdain, the same tone she used for a poorly chosen wine or an acquaintance's unfortunate fashion choice. "It's got to be the first thing to go. So dated. It's absolutely ghastly. And this carpet—" William grunted in agreement, his tone pragmatic and dismissive. "The whole ground floor needs to be opened up. We'd have to knock down this wall here between the dining room and the kitchen. Create a modern great room with an island. It would completely change the flow and feel of the place." My heart, which had been beating in a slow, sleepy rhythm, gave a painful, violent lurch. They weren't musing about some far-off hypothetical renovation. They were planning, strategizing. "Think of the resale value," William continued, his voice as cold and detached as if he were discussing a stock portfolio. "We can probably get a contractor in to give us an estimate a few weeks after, the funeral. Better to get it all done before we list it. A fresh, modern space will move much faster." The funeral. The two words hung in the air, monstrous and obscene in their casualness. My funeral. They were standing in my home, just a few feet from where I sat feigning sleep, divvying up the spoils and planning the demolition of my life's work, as if I were already a ghost, a mere inconvenience whose departure would clear the way for progress. "What about all her stuff?" Claire asked, and I could almost hear the delicate wrinkle of her nose. "This old furniture? It's all so heavy and dark. Nobody wants brown furniture anymore. Goodwill. Or we can hire one of those estate sale companies to see what we can get a few bucks for," William said dismissively. "Dad's old workshop in the garage is packed with junk too. We'll need a full-size dumpster for most of it, I imagine." I lay there perfectly still, my body frozen but my mind screaming in silent agony. Every word was a sledgehammer blow against the foundations of my world. My cherished possessions, the furniture Samuel and I had saved for years to buy, Arthur's tools that still held the faint, comforting scent of sawdust and oil, all of it was just junk. The wallpaper I'd so carefully picked out with my own mother, a happy memory from decades ago, was ghastly. The very walls that had sheltered their childhoods, that had absorbed their laughter and tears, were just an obstacle to a better flow. They weren't just planning to sell a house. They were planning to erase me, to methodically scrub away every trace of my existence, of my taste, of my love, all to make the property more palatable for a stranger with a checkbook. The silence that followed was broken only by the grandfather clock in the hall, each heavy tick marking another second of my life they were impatiently waiting to be over. In that single, horrifying moment, the cozy warmth of my home vanished, replaced by the chilling, unforgiving cold of a mausoleum. Sleep, when it finally found me that night, was not a refuge, but a battlefield of fragmented, anxious dreams. I saw sledgehammers crashing through walls of memories, my treasured belongings being tossed into a rusty dumpster. I woke long before dawn, the sky outside my bedroom window still a bruised, inky purple. The silence of the house felt entirely different. It was no longer peaceful, it was hollow, echoing with the ghosts of words I was never meant to hear. Shivering, I pulled on my old chenille robe, but it did little to ward off the profound chill that had settled deep in my bones, a cold that came from within. I began to walk through the rooms of my home, my sanctuary. But now it felt like a stranger's house, or worse, a crime scene where the victim was not only still alive, but had been forced to witness the plotting of her own demise. I ran my hand along the dining room wall, the very one William wanted to knock down to improve the flow. I remembered Samuel and I spending a whole weekend painting that room, laughing until our sides ached as I managed to get more pale yellow paint on his coveralls than on the walls themselves. Now, I could almost see the ghostly chalk outline where the sledgehammer would first make its mark. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and stared down at the black and white linoleum floor, the one Claire had called hideous in a hushed, mortified tone to her husband last Thanksgiving. My eyes found the faint, faded spot near the sink, worn down by my own 2 feet, where I had stood, day after day, for nearly 5 decades, washing dishes, packing school lunches, and staring out at the backyard where my children chased fireflies on. Summer evenings? Was all of that love, all of that labor so easily dismissed? Was it all just junk? My gaze fell upon the collection of delicate ceramic birds perched on the windowsill, each one a precious gift from Samuel from a different anniversary trip. A bluebird from the mountains, a cardinal from a coastal town. In my mind's eye, a horrifyingly clear vision played out. I saw them being swept carelessly into a dusty cardboard box marked donations, their delicate, hand-painted wings chipped and broken by utter indifference. The betrayal was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest that made each breath a shallow, painful effort. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was the casual, unthinking cruelty of it, the ghoulish impatience of it all. My children weren't just waiting for me to pass on. They were waiting for me to get out of the way of their inheritance. My continued existence was now just an inconvenient delay in their financial and architectural plans. A profound, bottomless loneliness washed over me. Who could I possibly talk to about this? Samuel was gone. My friends were my own age, most of them frail themselves, and I couldn't bear to burden them with the sheer ugliness of it all. To admit aloud that the two children I had raised to be loving and kind were, in fact, circling my life like vultures. The immense love I had for William and Claire didn't simply vanish, but it was now horribly wounded, irrevocably tainted by the knowledge of their secret, greedy desires. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a silent, invisible observer to my own impending obsolescence. The house, once my steadfast companion, now seemed to echo their venomous whispers in every room. It was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a waiting room, and I was the only one who hadn't realized my time was being counted down. The next few weeks passed in a heavy fog of quiet, private grief. I went through the motions of my life, tending my garden, reading my books, paying my bills, but a thick veil of grayness seemed to have fallen over everything, muting all the colors. When William or Claire would call, their voices dripping with a false, cheerful solicitude, "Just checking in on you, Mom. Hope you're doing okay." Each word felt like a hot poker pressed against my heart. I'd answer in polite monosyllables, my practiced Southern courtesy a thin, fragile veneer over a newly formed core of cold, hard anger. I couldn't look at them during their Sunday visits without seeing them with sledgehammers in their hands and dollar signs in their eyes. The house felt more and more like a stage set for a play whose final, tragic act I dreaded. I found myself avoiding certain rooms, unable to bear the weight of the memories they now dredged up, each one tarnished and painful. The ache of their betrayal was a constant companion, a low, miserable thrum beneath the surface of my days. One rainy Tuesday evening, I was idly flipping through television channels, the remote feeling heavy in my hand. I was desperate to find something, anything to distract me from the toxic churning in my mind. I landed on a local public television station, right in the middle of a special feature. A kind-faced man in a crisp blue polo shirt with a simple, elegant logo, a house with a heart inside it, was speaking directly to the camera. "A home is more than just shelter," he said, his voice earnest and warm, resonating with a truth I felt in my very soul. "It's about stability. It's about community. It's about giving a family a solid foundation on which to build their dreams." The program was about Habitat for Humanity. They showed footage of volunteers from all walks of life, eager teenagers, energetic retirees, men and women from every background, swinging hammers, raising walls, and carefully painting siding. Then the camera focused on a young family, a single mother with two small, bright-eyed children, standing in front of their newly completed home. The mother was crying, but her tears were not of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, life-altering gratitude. "We have a home," she kept repeating, her voice thick with an emotion so powerful it reached through the screen and grabbed hold of me. "Our very own home, a place where my kids will finally be safe." Her little boy, who couldn't have been more than 7, pointed with a look of pure, unadulterated pride to his bedroom window. "That's my room," he announced to the world, his smile a supernova of pure joy that could have lit up the city. In that instant, something deep inside me shifted. A single, defiant spark flickered in the cold, desolate landscape of my heart. I looked around my living room, at the sturdy walls that had protected my family, the solid roof that had kept us dry, the palpable warmth contained within. My children saw this place as a temporary asset, a teardown waiting to be gutted and flipped for a quick profit. But this young family on the screen, they saw what I saw. They saw what Samuel and I had seen all those years ago when we first walked through the door. They saw a home. The idea started as a whisper in the back of my mind and quickly grew into a deafening roar. What if the legacy of this house wasn't about being sold to the highest bidder? What if its ultimate purpose wasn't to be stripped of its soul and sterilized for a modern real estate market? What if its next chapter could be one of profound, transformative generosity? The anger and hurt I'd been nursing for weeks began to change, to transmute, recrystallizing into something hard, clear, and powerful, a resolute purpose. I could turn their greedy, disrespectful whispers into an answered prayer for someone else. I could take the very thing they were so eager to destroy and instead gift it to a family who would cherish it, who would fill its halls with new, joyous laughter, who would build their own beautiful memories within these same four walls. The plan bloomed in my mind, fully formed and absolutely radiant. It was elegant, it was righteous, and it was all mine. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in years, perhaps not since Samuel was alive. The heavy fog had lifted completely, replaced by a cool, steely resolve that felt foreign and exhilarating. I made my morning coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen as it always did. But instead of taking my cup to the porch to watch the world go by, I sat down at the small, mahogany secretary desk in the corner of my living room. Samuel had always used this desk for paying bills and writing his thoughtful, eloquent letters. Now it was my turn to conduct business of the utmost importance. My hands trembled slightly as I looked up the number for the local Habitat for Humanity chapter online. It was one thing to have the idea, a grand, defiant fantasy born of hurt and indignation. It was another thing entirely to pick up the phone and set it into irrevocable motion. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of doubt assailed me. Was this too drastic? Too vengeful? Was I acting out of spite? Then, as clearly as if he were standing beside me, I pictured William's cold, calculating voice talking about resale value and Claire's dismissive sigh about my old peasant food at Christmas dinner last year. No, this wasn't just about the house. This was a culmination of 1,000 small dismissals, 1,000 moments of being taken for granted, of being seen as a relic of a bygone era. This was about reclaiming the narrative of my own life. I took a deep, steadying breath and dialed the number. A cheerful, professional voice answered on the third ring. Habitat for Humanity, this is Hannah speaking. How can I help you? I cleared my throat, my own voice sounding thin and reedy to my ears, a stranger's voice. Hello, Hannah. My name is Evelyn Beaumont. I was watching a program about your organization last night, and I had a question about donations. I felt a strange, thrilling mix of terror and exhilaration, like a teenager making a prank call that could change the world. Of course, Evelyn, she said, her tone patient and immensely kind. Are you interested in donating furniture or building materials? We're always so grateful for those. No, I said, and to my own surprise, my voice was suddenly firm, resonant, and solid. It's bigger than that. I'm interested in donating my house. There was a brief, stunned pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, respectful sound of typing. Your house? Hannah's voice was now filled with a gentle, cautious interest, devoid of any pressure. That's an incredibly generous thought, Evelyn. We call that a planned gift, and it's one of the most impactful ways to create a legacy. Can you tell me a little more about what you have in mind? And so I did. I didn't tell her the whole ugly story about my children's ghoulish planning, of course. That was my private pain. Instead, I told her that I was an elderly widow, that the house held a lifetime of happy memories, and that I couldn't think of a better way to honor my beloved husband and the wonderful life we built together than by ensuring the house would continue to be a place of love, safety, and security for another family long after I was gone. As I spoke, the words flowed more and more easily, the narrative taking shape as I voiced it. The shame and hurt I'd been carrying for weeks began to feel less like a crushing burden and more like fuel for a righteous fire. Hannah listened with what felt like genuine compassion, asking gentle, clarifying questions. She explained the process, how I would need to speak with my lawyer to officially amend my will, how they would conduct a preliminary assessment of the property. She was never pushy or overly eager. She was profoundly respectful, treating my offer with the gravity and dignity it deserved, a stark, painful contrast to my own children's cavalier and dismissive attitude. By the time I hung up the phone 30 minutes later, I felt like a different woman. I felt lighter than I had in years. I felt powerful. The decision was no longer just a secret, angry thought festering in my mind. It was a real, tangible plan, set in motion. I had taken the first decisive step in turning my home from a source of future conflict and greed into a source of future hope and blessing. The house was mine, and its future would be my final, beautiful testament. A week later, a quiet, unassuming man named Paul, the local director for Habitat for Humanity, came to visit my home. He wore the same blue polo shirt I'd seen on the television, and his handshake was firm, his eyes kind and direct. He was joined by the woman from their planned giving department, the very same Hannah I had spoken with on the phone. Seeing her warm, smiling face in person was incredibly reassuring, making the whole endeavor feel real and right. I had spent the entire morning baking, filling the house with the comforting scent of apple cinnamon muffins, and I made a point to offer them coffee in my best china, the very set Claire found so impractical. For the first time in a long, painful while, I felt like a proud hostess in my own home again, not its weary, obsolete caretaker. We sat in the living room, and I told them about Samuel, about his laughter that could fill a room, about raising William and Claire, about the legendary neighborhood picnics we used to have on the front lawn every 4th of July. I wasn't just showing them a property to be appraised, I was sharing its very soul with them, entrusting them with its history. Paul listened with a quiet, focused reverence that touched me to my core. When I was finished, he looked around the room slowly and said, "Evelyn, this is a house with wonderful bones and an even more wonderful heart. Any family would be blessed beyond measure to live here." Wonderful bones. The simple phrase was a soothing balm on my deeply wounded spirit. William had seen walls that needed to be knocked down. Paul saw a strong, enduring foundation. After our coffee, I gave them a tour. As we walked from room to room, their perspective was a healing antidote to my children's poison. Paul didn't see dated wallpaper in the dining room. He saw charming, well-preserved vintage character. He didn't comment on the age of the kitchen appliances. He noted the ample counter space, the solid wood cabinetry, and the large walk-in pantry, calling it a dream for a family that loves to cook. When we went down to the cool, dry basement, he ran an appreciative hand along a thick support beam. "Samuel took magnificent care of this place," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You can tell. This is quality craftsmanship." Then came the moment I was dreading and anticipating. In my husband's workshop, surrounded by the neatly organized tools my son had dismissed as junk, Paul picked up an old, heavy hand plane. "My grandfather had one just like this," he said, a nostalgic smile spreading across his face. "He taught me how to use it. They don't make them with this kind of quality anymore. This is a legacy." Each word he spoke was a quiet but powerful validation, a systematic refutation of my children's callous, materialistic assessments. He saw the value, the history, and the love that was embedded in every floorboard and every nail of this house. We concluded the meeting back at my dining room table. Hannah laid out the preliminary paperwork, explaining every clause in clear, simple terms. It was a pledge, a formal statement of my intent to bequeath the property to their organization in my will. The final, legally binding steps would need to be handled by my lawyer, but this was the moral and emotional contract. I picked up the heavy fountain pen, its weight feeling significant and righteous in my hand. As I signed my name, Evelyn Beaumont, on the dotted line, a profound, unshakable sense of peace washed over me, calming the storm that had raged inside me for weeks. It was done. The house was no longer a future battleground for my greedy children. It was a promise. It was a gift. It was a legacy of kindness that would outlive all of us. As Paul and Hannah were leaving, Paul turned to me on the porch, his expression serious. "Evelyn," he said, shaking my hand once more, "what you're doing today is going to change a family's entire world, for generations to come. You're not just donating a house, you're donating a future. I watched them walk down the flagstone path Samuel had built, and I smiled. A true deep smile that reached all the way to my eyes for the first time in a very long time. My children hadn't inherited my reverence for this place, so I was giving it to someone who would. Life settled into a new, peculiar, and deeply satisfying rhythm. On the surface, to any outside observer, nothing had changed. I still tended my roses, read my novels, and baked on Tuesdays. But beneath the surface, everything was different. I was the keeper of a magnificent and powerful secret, and it imbued me with a quiet, unshakable serenity that felt like armor. The house no longer felt like a cold, contested space waiting to be violated. It felt like my co-conspirator. Its familiar creaks and groans no longer sounded mournful. They sounded like knowing, supportive whispers. When my children visited the following Sunday, the entire dynamic had shifted, though only I was aware of the monumental change. They arrived in their usual flurry of chaotic activity, the grandkids spilling into the house like a tidal wave of noise and uncontainable energy. Claire breezed into the kitchen, placing a store-bought pie on the counter without making eye contact. "Hi, Mom. We can't stay long. William has a conference call he needs to prep for later." It was the standard rushed, distracted greeting. Before, it would have left a small, sharp sting of disappointment. Now it just was. A simple fact, holding no power over me. As I served lemonade on the porch, William leaned against the doorframe, surveying the dining room through the open doorway. "You know, Mom," he said, in that casual, offhand way of his that always preceded an unsolicited and unhelpful opinion, "I was thinking, when the time comes, a nice neutral gray paint in here, like agreeable gray, would really brighten the place up. It would appeal to a much broader range of buyers." He said it so easily, so thoughtlessly, as if discussing the weather. A few weeks ago, that comment would have shattered me, reducing me to tears in private. But now, I just smiled a small, placid smile. "That's an interesting thought, dear," I said, my voice perfectly even and calm. I watched his face, saw the flicker of confusion at my lack of the expected sentimental reaction. He was used to me being protective, to me defending my choices. My serene, easy agreement seemed to throw him completely off balance. Later, Claire was helping me clear the plates from the table. "Oh, Mom, this old china," she sighed, tracing the delicate floral pattern with her perfectly manicured finger. "It's pretty, I guess, in a quaint sort of way, but it's so impractical. You can't even put it in the dishwasher. It's a waste of cabinet space, really." "It's not for convenience, dear," I replied, taking the plate from her gently, my touch firm. "It's for occasions. Some things are meant to be handled with care." I looked her right in the eye, and for a brief second, I believe she saw something different in me. Not just her frail, elderly mother, but a woman of substance and hidden depths she couldn't quite fathom. The rest of their visit was filled with these little moments, these tiny cuts they didn't even know they were making. They'd make a subtle jab at the old furniture, the overgrown ivy on the chimney, the drafty original windows, all part of their long-running, unspoken narrative about the house's obsolescence and my inability to keep up. And with each comment, I would simply nod or offer a non-committal, "Is that so?" Or, "I'll have to think about that." My calm was my shield. My secret was my sword. They saw a dotty old woman living in the past, blissfully oblivious to their plans. I saw two grown, successful children who were about to receive the most profound and elegantly delivered lesson of their lives. I wasn't bitter or seething anymore. I was simply above it all. I was the playwright of this final, surprising act, and they were merely actors, completely unaware that their roles, and the entire plot, had been completely and irrevocably rewritten. When they finally left, waving a cursory goodbye from their expensive, gleaming SUV, I stood on the porch and felt not a single pang of sadness, but a swelling wave of quiet, victorious triumph. They were driving away from an inheritance they believed was guaranteed, an inheritance that, for them, no longer existed. It has now been 6 months since I signed the papers with Paul and Hannah from Habitat for Humanity. My updated will, clear and resolute, sits in a safe deposit box at the bank. a quiet but powerful testament to a choice made not in the heat of anger, but in the clarity of love, a different, broader kind of love than I had originally intended. It is a love for my own deeply held values, for my husband's memory, and for the very idea of what a home should be, a sanctuary, not a commodity. My children continue their perfunctory Sunday visits, blissfully, arrogantly, unaware of the new reality. Their conversation still circles, vulture-like, around the familiar topics of renovation and resale, of market trends and property taxes. They look at this house and they see an asset to be liquidated. They see a project to be managed. They see a closing date on the horizon, a date marked by my death. But I see something else entirely. I see the face of the young mother I saw on the television, her eyes shining with tears of pure, unadulterated gratitude. I see her little boy, his face alight with joy, pointing to his very own bedroom window. In my mind's eye, I see a new family moving in, not with sledgehammers and dumpsters, but with cardboard boxes full of hopes and dreams. I imagine them celebrating their first Christmas in my living room, their fresh, new laughter echoing where mine and Samuel's once did. I picture them planting their own flowers in my garden, their hands in the same rich Carolina soil, starting their own history. I see a little girl's height being marked on the pantry doorframe, just as Claire's once was. This house was built to hold love. For 47 years, it held mine. When my children demonstrated that they were incapable of being its next faithful stewards, I simply exercised my right to find someone who would be. This isn't an act of revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, fleeting thing that ultimately corrodes the one who seeks it. This is an act of legacy. It is a profound and final statement of my values. My children prized modernity over memory, profit over sentiment, and an open concept flow over a solid foundation. They saw this home as a thing to be stripped of its identity and sold for parts. So I am giving it, whole and loved, to people who will see it as a precious gift to be cherished and lived in. I have found a deep and abiding peace in this decision. The sharp, constant hurt has receded, replaced by a quiet, powerful sense of purpose that warms me more than any blanket ever could. I am the master of my own fate and the author of my own ending. My home, the loyal companion that has sheltered me for my entire adult life, will not be desecrated. It will not be flipped. Its final act will be its greatest and most noble. It will become a sanctuary once more, not for my fading memories, but for another family's bright and burgeoning future. And when my children finally read my will, they will be left with absolutely nothing but the cold, bitter dust of their own greed and the stunning, irreversible knowledge that the greatest inheritance I had to give them, a home filled with a lifetime of love, was something they never truly understood or valued in the first place.